troubleshoot any problem is start at the problem and work backwards. It doesn't matter what it is, but start at the problem, what the problem is, and then you work back to the problem. We'll probably be doing a bit of that, but I really want to start working forward from this. Pinpointing, putting a name on it, putting a place on it, putting a face on it, what our problems are, the inward fighting. James, in chapter 4, he points out the spiritual struggle of, well, actually in the book of James, not just in chapter 4, but in all of the book of James, James points out the spiritual struggle of believers, what we struggle with spiritually. And in the writing of this book, James chapter 1, he talks about trials produce patience. And then he reminds us that we ought to be a hearer of the word and not only just a hearer, but a doer also. James goes on in this writing to condemn favoritism. All these things are outward workings when you start talking about patience and hearer of the word, because a hearer of the word is going to respond in obedience. They're going to be a doer of the word. In chapter 2, he condemns favoritism. And he tells us the value of faith, and he tells us the value of works. They are complementary. They're not striving and struggling and pulling against one another. They are complementary. If an individual have faith, then works are going to follow. And then if you will know if an individual have faith because of his work and vice versa. So he talks about faith and works. And then he talked about, in this writing of these 5 chapters, talk about the damage of an uncontrolled tongue. The infamous comedian Mr. Flip Wilson used to say, "Loose lips sink ships." I don't know how true that is, but I know loose lips can cause a lot of damage on ships. I know that, on any ship. So he talks about the damage of an uncontrolled tongue and how much problem it can cause the little member, but do great, great damage. And then in chapter 5, because I'm coming back to chapter 4, well, actually before we get to chapter 5, he also talks about wisdom and folly in chapter 3. Talk about how divine wisdom come from above, is peaceable, and all of those things, while earthly wisdom carries with it a lot of confusion, a lot of friction, earthly wisdom. In other words, he's saying there's a lot of smart people who know a lot of things, but they always causing, they understand the dynamic of church and everything like that, but because they are not spiritual minded, they can cause a lot of tension. Earthly wisdom. And so in chapter 5, he tells us not to trust in the vanity of riches. And then lastly, James discussed for us patience and prayer. So that's basically what his book, this book, comprises of. We're going to keep in mind that James is writing to Orthodox Jewish believers. That's what this book is for, Orthodox. And he's writing to them who have been under the old covenant. They know what the covenant of Judaism, Moses, they knew what it comprises of. They are aware of that. but here Christ come, and now they are under the covenant of grace. And James seeks to lead them into a covenant of grace, the covenant of grace, apart from the covenant of work. And there is quite a bit of difference. So chapter 4 of our textual chapter, James speaks on how to draw near to God. Now, anything that God has, you can have it if you draw near. And if you are mature enough to exercise yourself in it, God will give it to you. We learned that in chapter 1. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask God. He give it to you liberally, upbraided, and he will not scorn you at all. So in chapter 4, he speaks on how to draw near to God. And if you draw near to God, that can be your theme of your personal endeavors during these times when we can't go and do a lot of things, that we used to do, that we can say, well, I'm going to make my mission personal. I'm going to draw nearer to God. You may be close, but that's not the issue. I want to draw closer to God, you see. And so verse 8 says verse 8, 9, 16 rather. And he will draw near to you. This word to draw, it has the idea, it carries the idea of a motion without force. A motion without force is that you freely and deliberately desire to draw near to God. Nobody's forcing you. Nobody is making you. You deliberately, you freely want to draw near to God. That's what I'm after. It's drawing near. I'm after saints, after Galileans, I'm after anybody who's listening. I'm after you personally. You're doing this for you. I want to draw near to God. I don't want to be forced. It's kind of like, it's the opposite in the third chapter of Acts 8 chapter rather, verse 3, when the apostle, he wasn't an apostle then, he was really Saul. When he was persecuting Christians, it said that in essence, he said, paraphrase, he drugged them out of their places of worship, and he committed them and to those who were putting Christians in jail. So that was force. But here it's saying because of the majesty of God, because of the kindness of God, because of all of what God has done and who he is, I want to be found guilty of drawing near to God. I believe that's every believer's quest, is to draw near to God. I know there's some people in our lives that we love and that we delight in drawing near, but you know as well as I do, there's nobody like God. Now listen, the intent in this study is to focus up on the inward man, and not the inward man, and not the conflict that come about because of the conflict and rage that rages unchecked within us. See, if conflict, wars, rumors of war, if it rages unchecked within me, then everywhere I go, here comes a war. Here comes a war. War just don't show up. It show up because there's conflict and rage and war. And so the war that's in me will get out of me. And I think one of the things that church have been guilty of, the body of Christ, is we've been trying to put out wars without pinpointing where wars start. You must go to the source of the war. If everywhere you go and a war come along, you need to examine yourself. Everywhere. And so that's what we want to do. I don't want to talk about church fight. I've seen enough of them, who don't like nobody. And all. I'm not talking about that. I want to deal with why you don't like nobody. I want to, I want to deal with why you are the way you are. Why you don't like nobody. I mean, that's contradictory to the very nature of Christ. Christ is a lover of sinners, and Christ is a lover of people. He loved people. Little man up a tree, he loved them. A woman who had issues, she loved them. He loved her rather. So I want to deal with not the effect of it on the outside, not the objective effect of it, but I want to deal with the subjective effect of it. See, if I had, if you have a condition in your body and you don't deal with that condition in your body subjectively, which means within, then that condition will manifest and come out. Are y'all with me this evening? So we don't want to deal with we want to deal with the unchecked conflict that rages within. It's unchecked within us. Look at the C portion of verse 1. Even of your lust that war in your members. Now look what he says now. He said that lust. Now lust is the undue longing and desire for that which lawfully we shouldn't do for the Christian. When you lust after something, you're not lusting after it's. I'm glad I'm a preacher. Nobody don't want my job. So no, Reverend, that's too hard of a job. I don't want that job. Lust is, see, most of us, here's what we do. We put a sexual connotation to lust. But this is not what he is referring to here. It's, yes, to lust after a woman to lust after a man, that is a sin. And let's make no mistake about it. But that's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about he's speaking of the desire to have what is not yours. Listen, it works like this. If it's not yours to be president of that ministry group, leave it alone. You shouldn't want it if it's not yours. Wait on your time. They that wait upon the Lord. Oh, man, shall renew. Oh, what does this have to do with where we are, pastor, preacher? Perhaps God will be merciful to us and to bring us together again. And when he bring me together with brothers and sisters again, I will have a different attitude about who I am. And when I get a different attitude about who I am, I'll have a different attitude about who they are and the relationship that we have one with another. So sit on down and take this like a man or a woman. So he says, it's the undue longing or desire of that which is forbidden you. And he says, now look what he says in the C portion of verse 1. He said, even of your lust that wars in your members. He's not talking about in the members of the body. He's talking about in you, in your mind, in your soul, in your being, in your intellect, in your thought life. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And if I have a war going on in my thought life, a war going on in my heart, a war going on, see, the intellect and the emotion and the desire rest within the soul. If there's a war going on in my soul about who I am and what I'm doing, well, I bring all that unhealthy stuff to the body. Not only to the body, but in your home, on your job, wherever you go, that's what you bring. That's the reason why the apostle can say, as a man thinketh in his heart, or rather Solomon, so is he. As you think in your heart, you're no more than that. So the lust is this, that wars in your members. You see that? That's the C portion of verse number 1. James have us to know that ungodly desire and longing in us in verse number 5. Look at verse 5. In verse 5, verse 5. He wants us to know that, no, that's not in verse 5, that's in verse 1. In verse 1, leads to ungodly conduct among believers. Look at it. He says in verse 1, for whence cometh wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence of your lust that war in your members? He wants us to know. And then in verse 2, look at the conduct. You kill to have. You cannot obtain. You kill to have. You destroy the lives of good people. Wars. There's collateral damage to wars. Collateral damage is that you not only take the target out, but there are a lot of little areas around you that you take out. Anybody who falls timber, in other words, you're a wood cutter, you cut wood. Anybody know that when you fall big trees, they fall on small trees. And you have to be careful not to destroy all of the underlings that's growing up around you. James says in verse number 2, it says that you lust, you have an undue longing of desire, and you can't have. You kill, you desire to have, you desire in the wrong way, and cannot obtain. In other words, there's a prohibition. That there's something there that God has set in place that you will never get it from me if you have conduct as such. Verse 1 speaks of the war, the problem. I'm trying to trace this all the way to the root to show you where it come from. I hope I'm making some headway. He says that in verse 2, you lust, you have not, you kill, you desire to have, you cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet ye have not. Why? Because ye ask not. wait a minute. I just read in verse number 3 that you do ask. And James says before that in verse 2, he says, you ask not. Now, this looks like a play of languages going on here, something. A play of words. Something unorthodox is going on here. What is he talking about? James, in this portion of verse 2, because you ask not. And in verse 3, James clarifies what he means in verse 2, because you ask not. Verse 3, you ask, and receive not. Verse 2 said you, because you didn't ask. Verse 1 said verse 3 says you ask and you receive not. Well, there is something wrong between me asking and me not receiving. There's a hindrance somewhere in here between me asking God and not receiving from God what I ask him. God is a good God. He don't never fail. Isn't that what we saying? Sure we do. Take it to the Lord in prayer. Don't we sing that? Sure we do. But here James says to these believers, probably was at Jerusalem, James, Bishop Jerusalem. He says to these believers, these Jewish believers, he says, you ask and receive not. Now here's what happened. Note now, you go from, number one, you go from your desire to your conduct. Your desire to your conduct. In verse 1, it's your desire. Where those wars come, they come not hence. Even they come they not hence, even from your lust that war in your members. That's where wars come from. That is your desire. In verse 2, your conduct. Your conduct is of such you can't have, you kill, you desire to have, you cannot obtain, you fight and war. You fight in war, ye have not because ye ask not. That is the conduct that is given to you as a result of your desire being wrong. Your desire is out of a lustful posture. And then look at what happened. When he used the term in verse number 2, he used the word because you ask not. Keep your finger right there. And then in verse 3, he used the same term. Ye ask, you receive not. Use it again. Ye ask amiss. He uses it 3 times, asking God. And yet, God won't do it. You may be there this evening. Now, if you're there, you're at a critical point, and I want to help you. Because you've been singing also, I heard you saying, God is the on-time God. He don't never fail. I heard you say just, whatever it is, take it to the Lord in prayer. I heard you say, cast all your cares upon the Lord. He careth for you. Didn't you say that? Sure you did. But you ask, you don't have, you can't obtain, you're miserable, you make everybody else miserable, not because of the situation that is outward, but because of the situation that is inward. This will not just go away. This has to be dealt with. He goes from desire in verse 1 to conduct in verse 2. And 3 times that he speaks of ask. Now get this down. He's talking about your prayer life. Talking about your prayer life. Your prayer life have been shut up. God has, you're talking, but your prayers aren't getting through to God. Oh, I wish I had somebody. Am I making any sense? Y'all out there on Facebook, am I making any sense? YouTube, am I making any sense? Your prayer life have been shut down. God has shut you down. And you can't start yourself back up. You're trying. He says, if you are lustful, you ask because you ask not. Your prayers is like not asking God. That's what verse 3 defines verse 2. It is like not even asking God. God, let's go on and put that in 5:13. You don't want your prayers to go in 5:13. You don't let him put it on the desk somewhere where he go back and look at it. Put it up there on the desk. 5:13 is terrible. That means that won't nothing in there. That's going out with the evening trash. With the cleaning lady in the evening, she's taking that out. That's going to be burned. Come on now. So he goes from desire in verse 1, conduct in verse 2. I'm almost through with this. And then to an honest, an errant prayer life. See, in verse 3 speaks of how errant your prayer life become. He says in verse 3, you ask, you receive not, because you ask amiss. Amiss means just what it said. You missed it. That's what it is. A miss. You missed it. If you missed the third strike, usually in American baseball, you are out. You just turn around and go start walking back toward the dugout and sit down. But thank God, like in baseball, God, is kind and merciful. He's long-suffering. And you get another chance at the plate. And you can hit a single or you can hit it out of the ballpark. That's the whole idea. When you pinpoint what it is that you need to pinpoint, brothers and sisters, you can ask God whatever you will. And if you got that right, watch and see what God, but when you are asking God amiss, see, you're not asking it to glorify him. You're asking it to enhance you. The little fella, he stood up on the day of prayer. Little Pharisee said, I thank you, God, that I'm not like other men. I give this portion of my, salary. I tithe from everything that I have. When you pray amiss, you're not praying that God's will be done in earth. You're praying that your will be done in heaven so you can do what you want to be done in earth. Somebody is praying that God don't let that person sit by me. Don't let that person sit. God, let that person come and sit right by you until you learn to say, God, whatever it is that you want me to do, I can do it. Brothers and sisters, this is no time to be wimpish. I don't mean no harm, but man, you got to be setting strong now in the grace of God. You got to be able to stand. And therefore, having done all to stand, keep standing. God's not going to make you stand. He has provided what you need to stand. And he says, reason why some of you all don't have, can't obtain, or whatever, he's not talking about things. That's not what he's talking about here. Remember. Reason why you can't have peace and can't have joy, you can't have confidence in God, is because you're praying wrong. I'm talking about good people who are missing it. People who don't know how God operates with other people. And can I say this? God doesn't operate with nobody the way he wants, the way they want him to operate. He operates on sovereign basis. You got to understand that he is the sovereign, not a sovereign. He is the sovereign. When God come in the room, everybody else bow down. When God said this is the way it needs to be done, he's not talking about what he discovered in council meeting last night. He's talking about what he had decreed in eternity past. And whatever he decreed in eternity past must come to pass, even if it involves you. I have problem with people, and I guess I shouldn't, but I do. I have problem with people who believe that God all of a sudden just... Listen, Joseph had been in prison for 13 years. And when the king got ready for Joseph, when God got ready to bring him up, and all of the cupbearer had forgotten Joseph. And the Bible says that when God got ready, they brought him up quickly. God can erase 13 years like it was just a moment. Huh? Our prayers must be prayers of faith. They must be prayers of faith. Our prayers are prayers of faith. They're not prayers of hope. I hope God. No, I know God will. What do you mean? If he don't do it on my watch and everything is in line, he'll do it while I'm gone. He doesn't have to do it on my watch. You have a group of people who believe that God will only work if they are in place. Oh. God works whenever he get ready. However, James wants these believers to know that and there was a lot of persecution during those times and so forth. When, a little struggle, a little trials. We are having a few things, not persecution yet, but we're having a few little things now, and it's going to get a little worse, a little darker, and the footman's going to stop running after a while. We're going to look around, and here come the horsemen. So we're going to have to run with them. And then we look out, and the judge going to swell up. So we're going to have to go through that too. But now is a time for us to develop a prayer life that says to oneself that I believe that God will do what he said he will do. If this was Sunday morning, I'd ask somebody, come on now. If this was Sunday morning. This is not Sunday morning, but if I was really, that's what I'd ask you. So James says your desire, verse 1, your conduct, verse 2, and your life of prayer is an errant life. You're in error by the way you're praying. Because you don't want to glorify me with what I give you. You want to take it and use it on yourself. You want to use your gifting on you. Your gifting, you need to die in your gifting, that God may be elevated. James is in keep with the theme of his writing. He writes consecutively throughout. He writes the same thing in different ways. He talks about prayer and faith and areas of the word, doers of the word. He's talking about treating others well. He's talking about wisdom. um, that is from above and from beneath. He's talking about our discipline in speech. He's talking about our patience, and etc. He does not change. He does not change. In verse 3, he does not change anything when he comes to verse number 3. You ask, you receive not, because you ask amiss, that you may consume it up on your lust. Let's do this. Let's turn to chapter 1 quickly, and I'll be at 1 and 5. He's talking about faith here. All prayers must be prayers of faith, right? Sure, we know that. If any lack wisdom, let him ask, there you have it, ask God. What were you asking? You were asking amiss. You ask God, that giveth to who? All men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, not wavering, for he that wavereth is like the wave of the sea driven with the wind and tossed. Let no man that let not that man think that he shall receive anything from the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all of his way. When there are wars, when your desire is wrong, when your desire is wrong, when you are forcing yourself or others are forcing you, to lust after things and lust after ideas and lust after position, they force you to do that, remember, it is freely that you do it, not forcefully. He says that the prayer of faith won't work with you because it's not a prayer of faith. That's the front end. That's the front end. Let's look at 5 and 16, and we can see the back end of it. James keep up and keep consistent with his theme of what he's teaching. In 16, he says, look at this. When he talk about, this is how the outworking ought to be between other believers. When you have pinpointed what it is that's on the inside of you. Look what he says. Confess your faults. He didn't say confess your sin. You confess sin to God. Nobody can forgive you for sin. Confess your faults one to another. We have faults. In the ancient world, they made a lot of statues. There were statue makers. And all of the statue makers, not all of them, but many of them, they would make, and anybody know, I'm not a stone cutter, but I know this, when you're using stone, there are cracks in stone. Some of them are seen, some of them aren't seen, cracks. And when a statue maker would make a statue out of granite, out of some other precious stone, what he would find, marble, what he would find many times, that a crack would show up in him carving away the stone. And what they would do is that a crack is a fault. Crack is a fault. If you got anything, it's a fault. I had to get a cap in my tooth because it, is a fault. And if I hadn't had a cap put on it, it eventually would have decayed and whatever else, and I would have lost the tooth. But they put a cap on it to seal that fault. They would make the statue, they would carve it, chisel it, and when they found a way to deal with the with the crack. And I think the way in which they deal with the crack is somewhat in the statue is somewhat how we like to deal with it. They would put wax in the crack, fill it up with wax. Wax is a pliable material. They would fill it with wax, and they would sell the statue. The person who bought it Had no idea because they put the coloring and all whatever that needed to be in there that it fit right in there, full of wax. They go home, I got a $50,000 statue that's full of cracks. Exaggerating a little bit, but you get the idea. But by and by, the warm temperature, the weather, will cause the wax to melt and start dripping down. It doesn't matter who you are, you got faults. You got cracks. But the one thing that I don't want you to do is try to fill them with the pliable material. You need to surrender unto the Lord, and he will not only fill the cracks, but he'll wipe them away. Don't care what they are. If you don't do that, they're going to come out every time in some kind of intercourse with other believers. Your cracks and the things that are in you will come out of you. The only way you can deal with them is you have to deal with them at the feet of Jesus. The only way you can deal with, Lord, just as I am, without one plea. Peter didn't have any time to waste with these Hebrew believers. He was whipping them into shape. The most practical book about living. Living doesn't start with your neighbor. Living starts with you on the inside of you. And what on the inside of you is Christ, who is the hope of glory. Ain't no glory. There isn't any glory in us. There isn't any grace in us. There isn't any mercy of any sort in us. It's in Christ. And so James says, and I'm through, confess your faults one to another. And there you have it. And pray for one another, that ye may be healed. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. I hope that you can see the scope and the depth of prayer. I was not teaching, I was not trying to bring this to you in the context of that. I just want you to see the scope of prayer and how much emphasis James placed on it. So he says that your prayers are not going to make it through. They can't make it through because you're praying amiss. The pinpointing of the problem start with your desire. I'm wrapping up. Your desire. Your desire. Your longing for something to come to pass. God creates desires in the heart. Stop desiring that a sister or a brother, something that you wouldn't want to happen to you, happen to them. Huh? Stop desiring. Whoever sit beside you from now on, thank God that they sitting there. Come on now. Your desire leads to your conduct. Your desire. And your conduct will lead to a life of prayer or a life of fervent prayer. 5 and 16. Or prayer that is errant. That is errant. A errant prayer. And you don't want your prayer. You don't want your prayer to miss God. You want God to answer your prayer. God bless you on this evening. I trust that you have been blessed. My prayer that you have. And this is something that you can do, pinpointing those areas while you are off. You don't have to, say I would do this. You got all the help you need. You got all the help you need. If you don't have help to know how, all you need to do is make a telephone call. I'm available over the phone. I can tell you what you need to do, but you need to do that. These are good time for you to take a good introspective of yourself, a good look at yourself, and to see if I'm the problem or am I the solution to the problem. God bless you is our prayer. Let's not forget that on Sunday morning we do our preachment and pray for us that we continue to present Christ as not only he's not a way, he is the way. He is nobody but him. This is hear ye him. That's what we can tell you. So let's at 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Thank you for your giving, and please let me encourage all of us concerning our giving. Our giving is as essential as it is when we meet and gather as we have gathered over all the years that we have been here. Your giving, still your responsibility, your obligation. When I say your, I mean mine too, mine first of all. And so we want to keep that in consideration. I am grateful for what you have done, and I'm encouraging you to not slack back on that and be as faithful to God as God has been to you. All right. I believe that's comprises of everything that we have to do on this evening. God bless you. We'll see you the next time, if God give us grace.